August 11, 1943, somewhere on the Ukrainian steppe. T-34s of the 1st Guards Tank Army race across open ground at 30 kilometers per hour, their tracks throwing plumes of dust visible from aircraft circling above. The objective lies 12 kilometers ahead. The Kharkov-Poltava Railway, the primary logistics artery feeding German forces defending the great industrial city. Soviet intelligence has identified this rail line as carrying 70% of ammunition and fuel supplies to the German divisions arrayed between Kharkov and the Donets River. Sever this connection, and 3 panzer divisions and elements of the 6th Army will be stranded without resupply. Lead battalions reach the embankment near Valky Station. Engineers place demolition charges on the rails, while T-34s establish defensive positions facing west. Within 2 hours, explosions crater the roadbed across a 4-kilometer section. Supply trains destined for Kharkov sit immobile on sidings, their contents inaccessible to units now fighting with dwindling stocks. General Katakov's exploitation force has penetrated 128 kilometers beyond the initial breakthrough point in just 8 days. This depth places Soviet armor directly across the rear of Army Detachment Kempf, which now faces Encirclement. 45,000 German troops with their backs against the northern Donets River. This is Operation Rumyantsev, the southern hammer of the post-Kursk counteroffensives, and it would prove even more devastating than what happened at Oral. If you're interested in how wars are actually decided by logistics, math, and doctrine, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more in-depth World War II analysis. Let's continue. While Operation Kutuzov crushed the Oral salient in the north, the situation in the south remained fluid and dangerous. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's Army Group South had launched the southern pincer of Operation Citadel on July 5th, driving northward toward Kursk with the 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf. Unlike Model's grinding advance in the north, Manstein's forces had achieved deeper penetrations, redirecting 600 tanks of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps toward the railway junction of Prokhorovka. On July 12th, the same morning that Operation Kutuzov's artillery barrage announced the Soviet counteroffensive in the north, the largest tank battle in history erupted near Prokhorovka. Soviet doctrine called for aggressive counterattack at close range, negating the superior optics and main gun penetration of German heavy armor. The 88mm guns could kill a T-34 at 2,000 meters, but at 300 meters the disparity narrowed dramatically. Lieutenant General Pavel Rotmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army surged forward across the steppe, closing the distance to force point-blank engagement. The collision involved approximately 1,200 armored vehicles. German crews found themselves fighting at ranges where the sloped frontal armor of Soviet mediums could deflect shots, while Soviet gunners targeted track assemblies and turret rings when penetrating shots proved impossible. Both sides suffered catastrophic losses. 500 Soviet tanks were destroyed in 3 days. Rotmistrov's army was mauled to the point where Stalin considered removing him from command. But the German advance had been stopped. When Hitler canceled Operation Citadel on July 13th, following the Allied landings in Sicily, Manstein protested directly. He believed the Red Army was breaking. That continuation could achieve operational success. The assessment revealed the fundamental divergence between tactical and strategic vision. Manstein saw the battlefield. Hitler saw the map of Europe. The cancellation occurred while fighting continued at Prokhorovka. Crews firing into hull sides and engine decks received no immediate notification that their offensive had been terminated at the strategic level. The last German offensive in the east ended not with a decisive engagement, but with a headquarters decision driven by events 2,000 kilometers distant in the Mediterranean. Throughout the final week of July, Red Army logistics battalions converged on assembly areas south of the recaptured Kursk salient. 6,000 guns, ranging from 76mm divisional pieces to 203mm howitzers. They rolled into camouflaged firing positions along a front, stretching from Belgorod to Tomirovka, ammunition trucks stacked 152mm shell crates in earthen bunkers. Artillery officers hunched over maps, calculating firing tables for concentrations that would obliterate German positions in mathematically precise sequences. The Voronezh Front and Steppe Front massed divisions withdrawn from defensive positions into assault formations. Stalin's mechanized columns, the 1st Tank Army and 5th Guards Tank Army, rebuilt after Prokhorovka's losses, marshaled in concealed staging areas. The scale dwarfed previous Soviet offensives. More tubes concentrated per kilometer than Stalingrad. More shells stockpiled than the counteroffensive at Moscow. This was industrial warfare perfected, the application of overwhelming material superiority against an enemy that could no longer match Soviet production. The operation would be named for another field marshal from the wars against Napoleon, Rumyantsev, the 18th century commander who had defeated the Ottoman Empire. The name carried intent. This would not be a limited counterattack. This would be a strategic offensive aimed at liberating Belgorod, Kharkov, and the entire left bank of Ukraine. At 0500 hours on August 3, 1943, the artillery preparation began. 6,000 guns opened fire simultaneously across the breakthrough sectors. The barrage did not pause for infantry to follow. It rolled forward in timed lifts as assault battalions advanced behind the curtain of exploding steel. German positions around Belgorod vanished under concentrations that pulverized trenches, collapsed bunkers, and severed communication lines. General V. Kuznetsov later noted the synchronization. In view of the fact that our units and the troops of the enemy were in direct contact, the artillery opened fire simultaneously with the beginning of the advance. Freya radar stations detected IL-2 Sturmovix massing before dawn, but Luftwaffe fighters could not contest the waves of ground attack aircraft that arrived with the Barrage's opening salvos. The sky belonged to the Red Air Force. The breakthrough achieved its objectives within hours. The 5th Guards Army penetrated German defensive lines south of Belgorod. Tank armies exploited the gaps, pouring through sectors where the Wehrmacht's overstretched divisions, many transferred piecemeal from the collapsed Oral salient, could not establish continuous fronts. The pursuing formations drove west and south, bypassing strong points, severing supply routes. German units that had held their positions during Citadel now retreated before an offensive conducting operational maneuver on the scale they once executed in 1941. The tables had turned completely. By August 5th, Belgorod fell. That night, 120 guns fired salute in Moscow alongside the celebration for Oral's liberation. 2 cities recaptured on the same day. The first artillery salutes of the war. By August 7th, lead elements reached Bogodukov, 112 kilometers beyond the August 3rd start line. The speed eclipsed German withdrawals. Panzer divisions redeploying from northern sectors arrived to find Red Army Mechanized Corps already astride their assembly areas. While Rumyantsev smashed through German lines west of Belgorod, a supporting operation struck further south to prevent the Wehrmacht from concentrating its reserves. At 0530 hours on July the 17th, massed artillery of the South Front opened fire along a 12-kilometer stretch of the Mius River line. The bombardment signaled Operation Mius Front, a calculated strike against German 6th Army positions designed to exploit the weakening of Army Group South. The 5th Shock Army launched assault boats and improvised rafts toward defensive positions held by undermanned divisions already depleted by the failed offensive at Kursk. German machine gun nests and pre-registered mortar positions raked the water as lead elements pushed toward the western bank. The attackers employed lessons learned from previous river operations. Artillery fire shifted forward in timed waves, suppressing strong points while follow-on battalions exploited gaps. By midday, rifle divisions established 3 separate footholds along the opposite shore. The bridgeheads measured no more than 400 meters deep, yet they represented critical penetrations of a defensive system stripped of mobile reserves. The tactical mathematics favored the offensive. The Strategic Reserve, including the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, had been committed to Kursk and subsequently redirected to counter breakthroughs near Orel. The 6th Army now defended with infantry divisions at 60% strength, lacking armored counterattack capability. Mellenthin's observation proved prophetic once again. Positions held by company-strength units at dusk expanded to regimental fortresses by dawn as follow-on forces crossed under cover of darkness. By July 19th, the penetration extended 7 kilometers beyond the original German line. IL-2 Sturmovix dominated daylight operations, their 37mm cannons shredding supply columns, attempting to reinforce threatened sectors. The Mius offensive achieved its strategic purpose within 72 hours. German planners, already processing the failure at Kursk and the deteriorating situation near Orel, now confronted a third crisis point requiring scarce mobile formations. The cumulative effect accelerated decisions already in motion. Withdrawal became not merely advisable, but operationally necessary. The severing of the Kharkov-Poltava Railway on August 11th transformed the operational situation from difficult to desperate. General Kadakov's 1st Tank Army had penetrated 128 kilometers beyond the initial breakthrough point. This depth placed Soviet armor directly across the rear of Army Detachment Kempf, which now faced encirclement. German units defending Kharkov itself received conflicting orders: hold the city or withdraw before the corridor closed completely. Field Marshal von Manstein recognized the geometry of disaster. The Soviet advance threatened to pocket 4 divisions with approximately 45,000 troops against the northern Donets River. German attempts to restore the rail connection failed repeatedly. The 3rd Panzer Division, redeploying from the Orel sector, counterattacked toward Valky on August 13th, but encountered dug-in Soviet positions reinforced with anti-tank guns. The Panthers that survived the mechanical failures of Kursk now faced a different problem. Fuel shortages prevented sustained operations. Tanks advancing to restore communications burned their remaining diesel reaching the battlefield, leaving insufficient reserves for exploitation even if breakthroughs succeeded. By August 15th, the gap between Kharkov and German lines to the west measured 42 kilometers. Soviet cavalry and motorized rifle units moved through this corridor, establishing blocking positions that transformed the threat of encirclement into tactical reality. Evacuation routes narrowed to 2 roads running southwest through Murefa, both under constant air attack from IL-2 Sturmovix, operating without effective Luftwaffe opposition. The strategic initiative Hitler sought at Kursk had inverted completely. German forces now reacted to Soviet operational maneuver rather than dictating the battle's tempo. The Wehrmacht was dancing to the Red Army's tune. The battles around Kursk, Orel, and now Kharkov rendered a verdict on the competing philosophies of armored warfare. Near Ponyry during the Kursk fighting, a Panther's transmission had seized. The final drive gears, stressed beyond their engineering tolerances, welded themselves together through friction and heat. Black smoke poured from the engine compartment as the crew abandoned the machine, not to enemy fire, but to metallurgical failure. This scene repeated across the salient. The 60-ton machines that Hitler's stomach had turned over contemplating became monuments to over-engineering. The Panther's Maybach H-Ear L230 engine generated 700 horsepower, but the final drives, designed for a lighter vehicle, shattered under operational stress. At Kursk, mechanical breakdowns eliminated more German heavy armor than Soviet guns. The Tiger's 88mm gun could kill a T-34 at 2 kilometers, forcing Soviet crews to adopt boarding tactics, closing to ramming distance where armor advantage meant nothing. But immunity from frontal fire proved meaningless when the beast could not move. Porsche's creation, the Elephant tank destroyer, embodied a different failure: tactical blindness, engineered into steel. 68 tons. An 80mm gun capable of destroying any Soviet tank at extreme range. And no machine gun. None. Soviet infantry discovered this deficit at close range, approaching with magnetic mines and Molotov cocktails. The crews, sealed inside their bunkers on tracks, possessed no means of self-defense against foot soldiers. Vulnerability manufactured through omission. Against this complexity, the Soviets fielded simplicity multiplied. The T-34's 76mm gun could not penetrate Tiger armor frontally, but T-34s arrived in dozens where one German heavy tank appeared. The factories beyond the Urals produced tanks faster than German workshops could repair transmissions. When heavier firepower became necessary, the Su-152 appeared, a 152mm howitzer mounted on a KV chassis. The nickname emerged from results: Animal Killer. These self-propelled guns could crack open any of the cats at combat ranges. Tiger, Panther, Elephant, the 152mm round did not discriminate. The anti-tank strong points, P-tops with 3 to 12 guns each, supported by sapper platoons, dismantled the Panzerkiel wedge formation by creating interlocking fields of fire. German armor doctrine assumed breakthrough and exploitation. Soviet defensive engineering assumed attrition and channeling. Where the Wehrmacht concentrated force at single points, the Red Army distributed lethality across depth. By August 5th, as Stalin ordered the first artillery salute, the technical verdict had rendered itself. German engineering had produced masterpieces of individual capability that broke down under operational reality. Soviet engineering had produced adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers. The transmission failures at Panieri prefigured the strategic collapse that followed. Complexity defeated by mass. Perfection defeated by sufficiency. On August 23, 1943, at 0230 hours, elements of the Soviet 53rd Army and 5th Guard Z Tank Army penetrated the final German defensive positions on Kharkov's northern perimeter. The city, contested 4 times since October 1941, fell to the Red Army in what proved to be its definitive capture. German Army Group South, after holding the industrial center for 6 months following their successful 3rd battle counterstroke in March, abandoned Kharkov to avoid the encirclement that had threatened since August 11th. The liberation came 18 days after Operation Rumyantsev commenced with that preparatory barrage from 6,000 guns. The German withdrawal, conducted under the cover of Tiger and Elephant tank destroyers providing rearguard action, represented the final collapse of the Hagen Line positions that Wehrmacht planners had believed would stabilize the southern sector. The city's strategic value as a rail junction connecting German forces in the Donbass to their supply bases made its loss particularly severe. German combat engineers destroyed the Kharkiv tractor plant and locomotive works during their evacuation, but the Red Army captured substantial fuel depots and ammunition stocks that retreating units lacked time to demolish. At 2400 hours Moscow time, the Soviet capital erupted with a 224-gun artillery salute, an escalation from the 120-gun salvo that marked the liberation of Oryol and Belgorod on August 5th. The distinction reflected Kharkov's psychological importance. Stalin himself had ordered its recapture as a priority objective, viewing the city's repeated changes of control as emblematic of the war's shifting momentum. 4 times the city had changed hands. Now it would remain Soviet until the end. The Voronezh Front and Steppe Front forces consolidating control over Kharkov's ruins encountered a civilian population reduced from 900,000 in 1941 to approximately 190,000. The human cost of occupation and liberation written in demographics. On August 18, 1943, lead elements of the Central Front reached the Hagen Line east of Bryansk. The pursuit that began at Kursk 36 days earlier ground to a halt against concrete bunkers, layered wire obstacles, and anti-tank ditches stretching across the approaches to the city. The German fortifications represented months of preparation, interlocking fields of fire, pre-registered artillery coordinates, and prepared demolitions on every bridge and crossroads. Operation Kutuzov concluded not with a breakthrough, but with exhaustion against prepared defenses. The operational arithmetic told the story. Soviet forces had advanced between 140 and 150 kilometers westward from their starting positions near Kursk. The tempo, averaging 4 to 5 kilometers per day against continuous German resistance, had drained the mechanized spearheads of fuel, ammunition, and replacements. Artillery units had outrun their ammunition trains. Tank armies that began the operations with full establishments now fielded battalions at company strength. Rifle divisions required time to integrate replacements and restore unit cohesion after 6 weeks of continuous offensive operations. The Soviet advance continued beyond Kharkov without operational pause, exploiting the gap created in German defensive positions. Field intelligence indicated Wehrmacht units retreating toward the Dnieper River line, abandoning eastern Ukraine's remaining industrial centers. The Red Army's operational tempo, sustained offensive action from July 12 through August 23, demonstrated the quantitative and qualitative transformation of Soviet mechanized warfare since the desperate defensive battles of 1941. At Stavka headquarters in Moscow, clerks transcribed casualty reports onto tally sheets. Each figure represented a rifle division's strength, a tank corps' remaining armor, a field hospital's count of wounded. German losses across all sectors of the Kursk battle and subsequent Soviet counteroffensives approached 500,000 men. The figures included the cream of the panzer forces, tanks destroyed or abandoned, entire divisions reduced to skeletal formations with combat power at battalion level. The Red Army's bill ran far higher. Soviet casualty returns documented 863,000 men lost, killed, wounded, captured, or missing during the defensive phase and counteroffensives combined. The price of stopping the German thrust, then driving westward to liberate Orel, Belgorod, and Kharkov, emptied entire armies. The 6th Guards. Army alone reported 50,000 casualties. Tank losses exceeded 6,000 machines. The disparity reflected different operational realities. German defenders fought from prepared positions during the retreat, conducting textbook withdrawals covered by rear guards. Soviet rifle divisions absorbed horrific losses storming fortified lines. Marshal Zhukov's night attacks, employing powerful searchlights to stun defenders, pushed exhausted infantry across killing zones swept by machine gun fire. The casualty figures quantified what field commanders already knew. The Wehrmacht remained a formidable fighting force despite its losses. The advancing armies had purchased 150 kilometers of liberated territory in 3 major cities with nearly 1 million casualties. But the defenders had traded space for time, retreating westward with their formations battered but intact. They remained capable of fighting again. The question was, for how long? Field Marshal Walter Model stood in the operations room at 9th Army headquarters near Orel, reading the situation report dated August 4th. Soviet forces had begun their assault on the city. 1 day remained before the position would become untenable. The telephone call from OKH came within the hour. Stabilize the collapse, prevent encirclement, extract what could be saved. This scene would repeat itself across the Eastern Front for the next 21 months. The Fireman had found his defining role. Between August 1943 and May 1945, Hitler would dispatch Model to 6 separate sectors facing imminent breakthrough. Where Ernst Busch requested more divisions and Heinz Guderian proposed strategic withdrawals, Model arrived with authority to trade space for time. His method remained consistent. Identify the Schwerpunkt of Soviet advance. Concentrate available reserves at the penetration point. Authorize tactical retreats to shorten defensive lines. Execute the withdrawal before encirclement became inevitable. This transformation from offensive commander to defensive specialist reflected broader German strategic reality. The Wehrmacht had lost 3,000 tanks and assault guns at Kursk. Monthly German tank production in late 1943 averaged 600 vehicles. Soviet factories produced 2,000 monthly. The arithmetic of attrition permitted only one German response: elastic defense, fighting withdrawals, temporary stabilization of breakthrough sectors. Model understood what Hitler refused to accept. Germany could no longer win the war in the East. His mission involved delaying defeat, buying time for theoretical wonder weapons, preventing catastrophic encirclements that would accelerate collapse. From Orel to the Vistula, from Leningrad to Army Group Center's destruction, the Fireman would move from crisis to crisis, containing Soviet breakthroughs that offensive doctrine could no longer prevent. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge stood over operational maps at Army Group Center headquarters in late August 1943. The lines marking German positions retreated westward with each passing day. His words to Rastenburg carried the weight of strategic collapse. The situation for the 2nd Panzer Army is soon to become serious due to danger of breakthrough. The warning signaled more than tactical concern. The Wehrmacht began constructing defensive lines not as springboards for counteroffensive, but as barriers against annihilation. The offensive machine that rolled across France in 40 days, that drove to the gates of Moscow in 5 months, now dedicated its remaining strength to retreat and fortification. The heavy machines, those 57-ton cats immune to frontal fire, those 68-ton beasts designed to kill at 2,000 meters, shifted roles from spearhead to rearguard. The Panzerkeil, the wedge formation that shattered Soviet lines in 1941 and 1942, dissolved against anti-tank strongpoints deploying guns with interlocking fields of fire. German armor no longer penetrated, it covered withdrawals. The Eastern Front became a one-way mechanism. Soviet offensives generated German withdrawals. German counterattacks attempted to stabilize crumbling positions, never to regain lost ground. The initiative passed permanently to the Red Army. Adolf Hitler's earlier admission crystallized into strategic reality. Whenever I think of the attack, my stomach turns over. The Führer, who built his military reputation on offensive audacity, now presided over defensive disintegration. No amount of fortification compensated for the offensive capability destroyed at Kursk. From August 1943 forward, every German decision served one purpose: postponing the inevitable westward march of Soviet armor and the artillery salvos that would eventually sound not in Moscow, but in Berlin. The strategic conundrum Germany faced in June 1943, how to demonstrate that the Wehrmacht remained capable of offensive operations, had been answered definitively at Kursk, at Orel, at Belgorod, and finally at Kharkov. The answer was that it could not. The Red Army, bloodied but unbroken at the war's outset, now held not just the initiative but the future itself. And the road to Berlin lay open. If you enjoyed this story, hit subscribe for more World War II historical deep dives every week. Thanks for watching.